aspect, which is what he calls an a priori feeling, whatever an a priori. Only a German philosopher can have an a priori feeling. Whereas for Rousseau, we need to, as it were, harness. This is where he's closest to Hume, to harness the sentiments, harness the passions in the aid of a just political order, and that requires the construction of a civil religion.
So you quote. I mean, again, just to be very clear, because I think this runs through a lot of the book, and we'll run through the discussion. The problem here, and actually you do this beautifully, and I'd quite forgotten this in the Social Contract. See, it has fantastic modern echoes. Is that Rousseau addresses himself explicitly to the violent individualist, to the person, to essentially the Glaucon in the Republic, who says, why should I do anything for the general will where the general will doesn't simply accord with my own interests? So his argument is, as one might today think of it, the argument to the epitome of the neoliberal soul, as it were, that thinks okay, the system works in terms of interests. What is in my interest, I will do that. But I don't see what else apart from my own egoistic interests should motivate me. And
exactly, that's exactly it. Exactly. And so the problem for Rousseau, the audience for Rousseau, is the rational egoist.
Yes.
Right? The skeptical, enlightened, rational, urbane, rational egoist. Yeah.
And
how do we persuade such a person to enter into forms of association? That then becomes the dilemma of politics. How can we do that?
That is indeed, before that for Rousseau, and it seems to me for us too, we should think that until you get to that point, until you abandon the rational egoist position, the Homo economicus position, there is no politics. And indeed, it seems to me to be one of the fascinating things. Is it is one of the strands throughout your book is this question of the various ways in which liberalism has got rid of politics. You talk about the various ways. One of the ways which you don't spend very much time on, but I think is very much behind this section on Rousseau, is actually the degree to which modern economics has been important in getting rid of politics. The thought that the invisible hand produces good, saves us from original sin because it makes things good overall, is something which has meant that we don't have to concern ourselves with politics.
Yeah, I mean, this would be a sort of a version of a generous version of Hannah Arendt's thesis that the history of politics is the history of the disappearance of politics, and liberalism is the replacement of the political by the economic. That'd be or the social, as she calls it. So and Rousseau to that extent is an intensely, but by politics he means something like an association, something like the administration of a political order on the basis of association, or what he calls the general will.
Yes, I have written down somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. In fact, one of the definitions throughout the book, there are various definitions of what politics is, and one of them certainly is
association without representation.
Association without representation, a really wonderful formulation. Yes, this is what you say. The only legitimate institution is association without representation.
Uh-huh.
So in Rousseau's case, the Rousseauan idea behind this is that this is what allows a general will to become embodied.
Yeah, the legislative body for Rousseau is the assembly, and this then raises the big question with Rousseau, which is the question of number. How big can a polity be? We could talk about that, but Rousseau does not believe that that the association of human beings in a polity should be represented in an elected government. Right? There needs to be a government, an administration, and that administration is tasked with with carrying out the will of the people, which is decided in an assembly, but that government does not represent that will. So he has this very one-line throwaway argument about the British, and he had very strong views about Britain, country he hated, which was that the British believed themselves free, but their freedom only exists at the moment of casting the vote, and once the vote is cast, their freedom is cast aside, something like that. So that what Rousseau raises, and it raises it as a question for us, I think, and I don't really have dogmatic views on this, but for me it's really a question, is the question of representation. And we're in a world where the be-all and end-all of democracy is representation. Now, the least one can say is that if you're interested in philosophy or if you're interested in political theory, it's interesting that political philosophy begins in Plato with a critique of representation, and that critique of representation returns persistently, Rousseau being another high point of that, which also means that philosophy is no particular friend of democracy necessarily. But it raises the question about what might be the best means of conducting politics, given the spectacle of representation that we see played out yesterday in France and Greece, or 2 days ago in France and Greece. Is that all that politics is?
So you have a very, very interesting section on this magic of representation. Yeah. And maybe this is this can get us back onto the topic, which is in what sense is this theology? But maybe the way we can get there is on this question of the magic of representation. Again, going back to the sort of dominant methodological individualist view of this. I mean, one of the fascinating things about political economy as it's practiced by economists is that actually they have the hardest time in the world to make sense of voting. And of course, that's because they are, as it were, the ultimate realists. And if you take an ultimately realist position, then voting suffers exactly the same problem as Kant's categorical imperative suffers, which is, there's a vanishingly small probability that my vote will ever change anything. In fact, what Bush v. Gore 2000 shows us that if it should ever be the case that an important election is going to be won by a small number of individuals, then democracy will be suspended. So in the case in which democracy actually gives power to individuals, democracy is no longer allowed to function. Was what happened in 2000, and of course, given those vanishingly small probabilities of voting working, it means that the methodological individualist science like economics essentially can't have a theory of politics, because the only reason to vote, if we went to the extent that we do, is either ritualistic. It's in any case ritualistic. It's in any case as a belief that we are part of something larger.
Yeah.
And it's as a social body. It's as a whole, as an association, as in all these things, is the only thing that makes sense of voting.
We believe a kind of metaphysics that our will is embodied in the vote. Our votes collected together add up to some expression of popular will, which is then somehow incarnated in representatives of those votes in various parties, who in turn elect leaders or whatever it might be. It's a whole series of elaborate steps. So voting requires extraordinary faith, it seems to me.
Exactly, and so this is exactly the feel for what you do throughout the book. In various ways, is you remind us of the ways in which politics has not, in the slightest bit, become detached from faith, as the Enlightenment myth of progress has it, that actually we have got ourselves, that liberal democracy is the epitome of Enlightenment